All right, now, let's do some fan questions.
Hello, Chael. This is Roland Wixer from Germany. How well would Ronda Rousey from 2014-15, when she was undefeated, do in the UFC today?
How would Ronda do today? Well, it's a little bit of a tough question. I'll tell you why. If you're asking me skill-wise, of course it got surpassed. It got surpassed before she ever left. In fact, she left because it got surpassed. That isn't an attempt to take a knock at Ronda. But I guess what I'm telling you is one of the people that she lost to, who was Holly Holm, is now kind of one of the gals at this point. Holly was a champion of the world. Now she's kind of more of that 6'7" in the world spot. Take Amanda, who beat Ronda. Amanda would kick her own ass right now. The Amanda that fought Ronda versus the Amanda of today gets beat in about 6 minutes. That's just the gains that Amanda has taken. So if you're asking if you could take a fighter from even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago that had a pretty good run, but didn't leave on top by any means, and then put him in today, she could still be one of the gals. Ronda could walk right in today and be a top 10 gal. One of the problems that Ronda ran into was she became a victim of her own success in one way. Ronda drew so well, and Ronda had so many media opportunities to get a lot of eyeballs to the sport that you couldn't just stick her on a main card. That wasn't enough. You couldn't just stick her in a co-main event. It just wasn't enough. She was too commanding with the media to be anything less than a main event. That then got coupled even a little bit further to where main event was viewed as not enough, and she's got to fight for the world title. So that's one of the problems that Ronda has. Like what you saw, and you saw Ronda getting cleaned up in her last couple of fights. That's true, and that may be your last memory. But there wasn't very many gals alive that could do that to her. She was so successful, and she was so in command and demand that she had to fight in the hardest positions of the card, which, by the way, weren't only main events. They were world title fights. So when you're one of those people, what do you do in Ronda's shoes? In many ways, maybe it is best to just grab your ball and go into something else, which is what she did do. She gets criticized for that. But maybe that's the thing to do. Should have she done what every other athlete would have done, which is turn it into a cash grab at some point? Just stick around and keep a lot of contenders out and be a gatekeeper? I mean, that's a very real thing. It sounds a little condescending, but that's a very real part of the sport at some point. It's a very real part of your journey and of the business side of it at some point. You fall into that category. But she was in a tough spot where she had to fight for championships and she had to fight for titles. So to answer your question of how would she do, she did great. She did great in her career. She would do great right now. But she would be in main events and title fights, and she would be coming in second.
I hear everybody asking what's next for Usman. Shouldn't a rematch with Covington be what's next for Usman? I mean, let's repack this for a second. We have a controversial stoppage. I do believe blows to the back of the head are illegal. We have scorecards that could go either way. I personally had Covington winning 3-1. And then we have the low blow, which was not a low blow, and Usman looked hurt, and it kind of looked like he got bailed out on that one. Why is Covington not getting the respect he deserves? Is it just a matter of we don't like him? Quote, we don't like him? Don't you think he deserves a rematch?
Yeah, I like everything that you're saying, and I wouldn't disagree with you in any way. I do feel that maybe, the only thing that stopped the talks of an immediate rematch, because those really never got off the ground. You're bringing it up, I brought it up, I've heard it a little bit out there, but it hasn't been a big demand. My guess and my sense, the only thing that stopped that demand and that narrative from growing a little bit more rapidly was the broken jaw. I think it just became a question of, well, wait a second. What is a broken jaw? How long is a broken jaw? What is the recovery? And when would Colby be ready? And the only reason I speculate that that is what held it up is because everything that you just said is spot on. My goodness, we've got a story here. We've even got controversy. In fact, we've got 2 or 3 levels of controversy. Controversy creates cash. You can't script anything any better than that. And from a competitive standpoint, if you want to cling to the integrity, which you would have every right to do, but if you want to do that, if you're just that guy that just wants to go by the book and the ring, if Kamaru proved that he's the baddest man alive, Colby Covington proved that he is baddest man alive B. I mean, he proved how close. He proved his grit. He proved that competitively, we found the right two people. We're down to the final two. That was established. So I think the only thing holding that talk up from a little bit more momentum, I think, is the fact that there was an injury to Colby, and first off, that needs to be addressed.
What's up, Uncle Chael? It's Farouk from Houston. I got a question for you today. Dana just came out with an interview with Brett Okamoto, and he's stating that if Conor can get past Cowboy, that he's going to be next in line to face Khabib if Khabib beats Tony. My question is, it's a two-parter, really. What if Cowboy's the one to win the fight? Is he going to be the one to get the fight with Khabib then, or the winner of Khabib and Tony? And my other thing to it was, why is Justin Gaethje being sidelined for no reason? He's had 3 knockouts in a row. I think all 3 were first round, and he literally is the #1 contender. There's not really a case to be made besides Tony, who's already fighting for the title. So what's your opinion on this?
Okay, so timeout. Now you're going back a little bit. Okay, you're kind of captain 2 weeks ago on this question, or maybe it just slipped through the files and I should have edited this quicker and got it out. But I want to address it anyway. Let's start at point number 1. I think what you're saying, my interpretation of your question as it pertains to Dana stating that a Conor win gets Conor a title shot against Khabib, and you parlay that into a question, does the same apply for Cowboy? No, it does not, and that is not a new thing to this sport. We don't come down to, let's call it a semifinal, if you will. This is not a straight line semifinal. What's good for Conor is not good for Cowboy in this situation, but Cowboy won't even be upset about that. That is just one of the spots that this sport comes to. Let me give you a great example that I'd love to re-offer for the crowd, but it was the night that a barista named Pat Cummings was hired out of the Starbucks line where he was working to come in and fight Daniel Cormier. Now, the reason I bring that up, Daniel was on the card and Daniel just needed a fight that night. He needed to be in front of people and he needed a win. That's all he needed. Daniel got those things. He got a fight that night. He looked good and he got a win. He went from that into a world title fight, okay? Went and fought for the championship. Had Daniel lost, Pat Cummings' next fight was not going to be for the championship, and you wouldn't disagree with that. That wouldn't paint you surprised. Pat wouldn't disagree or argue. It just wasn't the same. And that's one thing about our sport is one guy could be a step closer, but that doesn't mean the other guy gets to have the equal footing. It just doesn't fully work that way. Second part, which you might find more interesting, you asked, why has Justin Gaethje been sidelined? He's on a 3-fight winning, and he's the rightful #1 contender. I agree with you, but Justin had come out recently, and he's the one who sidelined himself. He's the one that said, I will only fight if it is for a championship. In fact, I'm even going to train and prepare in case anything happens to either Khabib or Tony prior to their fight at Barclays in April. So if that is accurate information, and guys have the right to say that, maybe they're a little hot and maybe a little pissed off. They have a right to cool down the next day, get a phone call and go, okay, let's do that instead. But to answer your question and for the information that we've been given by Justin up to the time of this recording, he has elected to wait and see if somebody pulls out of that fight, which has happened 4 previous times. It's not a bad play at all by Gaethje. It's not a bad play to keep his weight in check, stay in the gym and train, use history as the greatest trajectory for the future, see that this fight's been scratched 4 times, and try to put himself in pole position to slide in if it gets canceled for a 5th time. It's a good, solid strategy by Justin, but to your question, I don't believe he has been sidelined. I believe he is working on a different strategy right now, and that strategy doesn't play out until April.
Hey Chael, this is Aiden from Portland, Maine. I just had a quick question about Cowboy Cerrone. Do you think he should retire after the Conor McGregor fight? I think he should, either if he wins or loses. One, if he loses, there's not much chance for him in the division, either it be 170 or 155. In 155, he's already tried to fight for the title there. He's failed, unfortunately, and I don't see him going up there. 2, if he wins, it's going to be a lot of media attention on him. I'm not sure if he's going to get the big payday like everybody thinks, but huge potential for sponsorships, etc. after his career. Let me know what you think. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm hoping you're not asking that from like a negative downer standpoint. You know, should this be the end and should he stop? I hope that's not what you're doing. And I trust that you aren't. And I halfway like what you're saying there. Now, I certainly would not predict that Cowboy is along those lines of thinking and that Cowboy's starting to step away. He doesn't show any signs of that, but I do get your logic. I do get your logic. Let's say, work this through a fast, that Cowboy gets the win over Conor. That's going to be great and that's going to be helpful, but where does he go? Where does he go from there? And unless you can have an answer that is meaningful or somewhat close in many ways, it's as though he's going backwards, and that does subscribe to what we discussed earlier with what goes up must come down. They can't all be big mega fights, but if you're looking to fill that void, or if you look at it and go, well, my best days are behind me, do I want to keep doing this? I suppose that that's a very real thing. The issue that you have with Cowboy stepping away, the issue that you have, and don't ever forget, is Cowboy and Conor are fighting at 170 pounds. And even if a victory for Conor qualifies him to go down to 155 and fight for the title, that hasn't been said for Cerrone. Maybe Cerrone is getting his foothold at 170. And if Cerrone is to beat Conor, I do think there's a real discussion there to bring the BMF back, and I'm talking about George Masvidal, and maybe get them together.
Hey Chael, Connor here from British Columbia, Canada. Do you think Kamaru Usman is too big for Khabib?
Yes, I do. And by too big, are you saying that Khabib can't go in there and compete or doing some of these childish things? No, I'm not. But if you're asking for a good straight competition, should we try to get those guys together? Khabib can get very big on the off season, but it's not the right way. He's one of those guys where all of his discipline and his everything needs to come about. And one of the ways that you know, metrically speaking, if everything has come about, is to get him on that scale at 155. I think he knows that about himself. I think his trainers, and I think everybody sees, and there's some athletes that are like that. They can just gain weight faster. They can get out of shape a little bit fast. There's certain parameters they have to put on themselves, but when those parameters are met, it meant that everything else, just as a byproduct, was also done and also met. And I personally believe, but you asked for my opinion, that Khabib and that scale reading 155 equates to a focused, disciplined, in shape Nurmagomedov.
Eye pokes are a big problem, I think, in the UFC. Feels like every card we have 2 or 3 fights. Somebody gets poked in the eye, they have to take a break in the action. I think one of the problems is the gloves. The way the gloves are, they're very stiff and they force your fingers straight out. Whereas the Pride gloves, the older gloves, kind of had a more natural curve to them like this, where they'd force your fingers down. So when guys are reaching and kind of, gauging that distance, their fingers are down, so they're not poking guys in the eyes. That's where it usually happens. So yeah, what do you think about this? What do you think about the UFC switching to that older style of glove that Pride had, where I've heard from various people, Joe Rogan, Brennan Schaub, Reddit MMA, RMMA, shout out. That's a great page for any MMA, UFC fans. They talk about how Pride had almost no glove eye pokes because of the gloves. So yeah, what do you think about that? Do you think the UFC will ever change the gloves and make any kind of reform?
I hate eye pokes. I mean, in anywhere. We're talking about an MMA right now, but in anywhere. I mean, a guy's eyes are pretty valuable, and he's only got a couple of them, right? I mean, this is pretty valuable. There's a reason that even with the limited rules, you stay away from a guy's eyes. I got to tell you, I don't know of any other walk of life where I've seen guys get poked in the eye more. I don't remember any game of this or match of that. I've never seen it more. And I don't disagree with you that perhaps it is because of that glove. I never felt that. I never felt those gloves were holding my fingers straight. But I also don't disagree with you when you do bring in the Pride glove and the way that it was rounded and it would hide the fingers a little bit more. Look, this discussion has been around for a meaningful period of time. A very meaningful period of time of should we change this glove and bring in more of that Pride where it's a little bit more curved and rounded. And so many people argued that, well, the grappler has to be given a respect too. I get that argument and I appreciate that argument, but this is where the grappler matters, right here, right? Your palm. Your palm is where so whatever the glove wants to do on the top side of it can do whatever the glove needs to do. It doesn't affect the grappler. It doesn't take away from some of those components. And I know that everybody's just trying to get it right. And everybody just wants to do what's right. Nobody likes the eye pokes. Everybody wants this to go away. I do agree with you. And some of those matches that you laid out just for recent memory, and I could match those 3 and match it with 3 more and then 3 more on top of that. I mean, there is some guy, that darn eye poke is a very real thing. And would the glove solve it? Yeah. It sure would. And it does seem as though something needs to be done. But it also needs to be with the athletes. You know, the referees are pretty clear that you don't stick a hand in a forward motion unless it's closed. The rules also do allow a guy to do what's called a straight arm, where you put your palm out and just hold a guy at bay. I mean, a lot of guys will do that just as a defense, where they'll stick their hand out and just hold the guy back like it's your little brother when he's 5 years old and living and trying to get it. You just hold him back. I mean, that's a very real thing. So you do have the right to move your hand in a forward direction without making a fist. The referees will tell you to use, but you actually don't have to. There's some defenses there. This is never okay. Straightforward fingers coming at the eyes is never okay, but we see it happen a lot. I don't have the answer for it. I think that possibly you do have a solution. Yeah, sure. There's a reason we don't ever see it in boxing, ever, which is the hand is just completely encompassed with a glove, and there is no finger that's even eligible or loose to be out there on the prowl and find its way into somebody's eye. So sure, is your glove solution? Yeah, I think that's great. Do I think that maybe that's an overcorrection, a little over-authority, that we ought to be able to just tell guys, don't poke him in the eye? And I can tell you, I did the sport for 22 years. That was enough for me.